I do want women to know that there is an alternative to suppressing their bodies with hormones, that they can see their body as a good and they can live in that body holistically.
Totally. Oh my gosh. It's amazing.
Join co-hosts Jamie Rocci and Teresa Kenney as they educate women about the beauty of the feminine design and empower women to take charge of their health.
They're going to be so amazing. You're going to be so empowered by understanding your feminine genius and your hormone genius. I don't think I could live my whole life knowing this and not sharing it with anyone.
Hello, welcome to the Hormone Genius. I'm Teresa Kenney here with my co-host Jamie Rocci, and we are here to talk about your thyroid. And in particular today, we're going to talk about what causes most issues in the thyroid gland, which is an autoimmune condition called Hashimoto's thyroid. And I'm sure a lot of you, there's so much information on the internet. You have heard that term and you've heard all sorts of reels about how you can heal your thyroid. And maybe you're listening today and wondered if you've had a thyroid condition. Maybe you have hypothyroidism and you've wondered if you have Hashimoto's. And maybe you have no idea what we're talking about. And Hashimoto sounds like some sort of a weird Japanese movie that. So all of that may apply to you, but we are glad you're here because this is this actually Hashimoto's, which affects 5% of the American population. And it affects women at least 5 to up to 15 times more than men. This condition affects a lot of people, and it was actually the kind of launching of the autoimmune world. Like it was the discovery of Hashimoto's thyroid, which really led to the concept of autoimmune disease, and in a sense, the whole field of that. So that's very interesting. And I know Jamie has, of course, an interest in Hashimoto's because it's a hormone and we are all about hormones. So she had some questions. I'm going to do my best to answer them and at least give my clinical kind of understanding and experience regarding thyroid issues. So this will be fun.
Awesome. Well, our first Q&A of season 6, Teresa.
Yeah.
Woohoo, exciting. What's interesting is that if you were to ask me 20 years ago, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, I've always been interested in health. You know, I have my master's in community health, and I've been in track, and I'm always interested in health and diet and nutrition, exercise, all these things. Okay. But I can't say that I ever had heard of Hashimoto's until maybe about 20 years ago. Maybe even like digging in more the last 15 years. It probably was a phrase or a word I've heard here and there, but when I started hearing it more is because my friends would share that they have Hashimoto's. And so it seems to me anyway that as we get older, like in the 30s and then the 40s, it seems like I'm hearing a lot more about this. I'm 40 years old, so it makes sense that even just with time being in the health industry, you hear more about many different types of hormone disorders. But the first question I'm going to have for you, Teresa, in terms of age, do you notice a higher frequency of Hashimoto's as we age? Is it because, if it's yes, is it because we're just better now as compared to maybe 20 years ago at diagnosing Hashimoto's properly? Or is it because as we age, we have a higher likelihood of autoimmune disorders kind of starting to kick in? Has it always been there? Has it been like sleeping and it gets aggravated? Or is it something that comes upon us based on lifestyle?
Yeah,
And aging?
Great questions. Yeah, I mean, age is definitely a factor. So it is more common to have thyroid issues in your 40s and 50s and beyond. Mm-hmm. So aging is a risk factor to thyroid issues and Hashimoto's. Now, autoimmune thyroid is somewhat of a gradual condition for probably most people, meaning that well before they would ever be in a doctor's office getting the blood test, they probably had the presence of autoimmune antibodies, which is what identifies Hashimoto's. But the process of the thyroid kind of going through that inflammation. So a lot of people will say, okay, Hashimoto's is really like not completely about the thyroid. It's an autoimmune condition, and you have these antibodies that are affecting in some ways the whole body. And then eventually you have the thyroid gland, and in and of itself, that is being affected, of course, and can lead to damage and then problems with the function of the thyroid. So it's almost like you can look at it in two different ways. But the reason why it's probably more common as we age is because it kind of takes three factors, and this is true of all autoimmune conditions, to really kind of launch an autoimmune condition. That is pre-genetic factors or an epigenetic factor, meaning that you genetically are predisposed to an autoimmune condition, and they've identified, I guess, some genes that they could test to figure that out. You have an environmental trigger or a viral trigger or a emotional trigger or a hormone trigger. So you then need a trigger. And of course, for women, they go through all sorts of hormonal shifts, right? But big ones would be pregnancy and postpartum. So those oftentimes are a place where people identify it. But again, there's so many environmental triggers. Obviously, we have more now in the last 100 years than ever. And then lastly, they've linked it to the gut. So the third component is this idea that once the gut is inflamed and affected by whatever these triggers are, it opens up this little one cell layer thick junctions in its intestinal lining, which is what we refer to as leaky gut. Mm-hmm. And once leaky gut occurs, now you have kind of like all of these like proteins and foreign invaders opened up into the body, like they're leaking through the gut. And the immune system is now on hyperdrive because it's like, what is all this? And how am I supposed to get it out? Or should I keep it? Or where does it go? And inevitably that leads to every autoimmune condition. But for Hashimoto's, it's the same thing. And it will attack, or in some ways they say kind of like it thinks it's supposed to go to the thyroid because there's some similarity to that tissue and what it's seen in the immune system. And then it attacks its own part. So it's attacking the thyroid tissue. Mm-hmm. And then that thyroid tissue becomes inflamed. And the guy who actually discovered Hashimoto's, it was in 1912. It was Dr. Kuru Hashimoto's. And he discovered that in the gland of patients that had this condition, that had a certain complex of symptoms, he looked at that tissue under a microscope, I assume, and then found that it was full of lymph cells. Mm-hmm. And so they found this disease in a sense, but they didn't really understand it way back then. It was just kind of like there's some physical change that's occurring in the thyroid with this condition, and inevitably named it after him.
Wow. Teresa, as you're speaking about this, and I'm thinking about, our body system and how our body systems and how important it is to understand inflammation and its effect systemically on our body, meaning it affects our whole body, not just one part of our body. That's what systemic means. How our gut health is so vital to so many things. And we hear about it all the time. I feel like there's been like a big gut health boom the last 5 years or whatever, which is super important. But how, if we knew how to keep our gut healthy and happy, our autoimmune disease would decrease. And that then leads me to the question of, I have two questions. One, can you reverse Hashimoto's with restoring gut health? Is that a safe thing to do? Like, in terms of the pros and cons, let's say we're working to restore our health. We have Hashimoto's. We're working to restore our health. We're working to restore our gut. Meanwhile, our thyroid gland is being attacked. It's kind of like how do people who want to manage things naturally really know how to measure the cost benefit ratio? And then even before you actually answer that question, Teresa, I'm thinking about people that might not even know necessarily where the thyroid is, what the thyroid does. So maybe actually let's dig into that just briefly for people who need a reminder. And then I'd love to hear your thoughts on this other question.
Yeah, great question. The thyroid gland, very important, but very small, sometimes small and mighty, in terms of organs. But if you are sitting there, you can put your hand kind of like your index finger and your thumb around your trachea. The trachea is the tube where your food goes down. And that area we call the Adam's apple. It usually is like where there's a little kind of nubbin or a notch in a sense. Men, you can see it a little bit better. But anyway, the thyroid gland is a little butterfly shaped organ right below that Adam's apple at the lowest base of the neck, you could say, kind of right around the trachea. And sometimes it's hard to feel, and that's okay because you're not supposed to like feel it a lot. So, that's why there's this word called goiter. Goiter and stands for enlarged thyroid. So if someone looks in the mirror and they're like, oh my gosh, why do I look like the lower part of my neck has this large swelling around that area? That's something you should definitely check out. And I had a patient with that one time whose OB completely ignored it, even though she explained she had all the symptoms of low thyroid, and she had the very large goiter with a nodule. So it's very important to be self-aware of what your body looks like. The thyroid is so important because it regulates, in a sense, all energy from a hormonal level. So it's regulating from a hormonal level energy in the body. And so it regulates heart rate, which is like life essential. It regulates body temperature, life essential. It regulates your like metabolism in a sense, like how much energy input and output is going on. It regulates a ton of things in the brain. It regulates skin cells because it keeps our skin moisturized. Those are like everything. So without the thyroid gland, I don't think we live. Or and actually people who don't have, very serious low thyroid can actually put someone into a coma and they could die from that. So that's how important the thyroid gland is. So the second question Jamie asked was just gut health and whether, and this is so common. Number one, because I had a patient yesterday who a lot of times when I get my labs back, you're like, okay, this is what this means, da, da, da. And so I had a patient that had thyroid antibodies that were positive with normal thyroid function otherwise, meaning that their actual thyroid hormone was normal, but they had positive antibodies. And this is a common scenario. And she wrote me back that she was panicking at the thought of this, and my first thought is, well, don't panic. Never panic. Never a good idea to panic about anything. Like take a breather and let's just educate ourselves, on what's going on. So, and this is why I said, Jamie, it's a very gradual progressive disease because you can have these antibodies present, but you can be functioning fine and frankly have no symptoms at all for years, even decades. That is possible. But it is also important to know that in order to reverse Hashimoto's, you have to catch it in these earlier stages, usually not in the latest stages. And the latest stages is when the antibodies have been present for so long that tissue of the thyroid now is damaged and it's not going to, in a sense, come back to life. And so, that is hard to revert. And I personally don't think it's possible to reverse it when it's damaged that heavily. And those people would need thyroid hormone replacement for the rest of their lives. But the people who are in the more gradual progression of it, yeah, I think people can put themselves into remission. There's always this kind of idea of remission and then cure. Like remission means that you've kind of cured it, but maybe you always have this chance of it coming back. We kind of talk about that sometimes with cancer. But remission means like there's no evidence of the disease. And that is something that's possible with Hashimoto's. And the gut is definitely tied to it. But I'll stop there for a minute just so I can take a pause and you can clarify, or if I need to clarify anything.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about my friends who have gotten their thyroid removed completely. And when would be the case that would happen? Would it be just that this autoimmune condition, Hashimoto's, has gotten so out of control, it damaged the thyroid tissue totally unmanaged, unmonitored, or maybe there was a cancer, of course, or nodules that they'd have to remove it. But I guess the question is, what are all the reasons that thyroid would need to be removed? I know you said that they would need hormone replacement therapy for the rest of their life because you need the thyroid to live. But what would, be all the reasons that would need to even be removed?
Yeah, and I'm not an endocrinologist, so I'm not going to claim that I know the exact details of this. I think my general understanding is that it's when the thyroid is full of nodules or any nodules that could be suspicious of cancer. that a lot of times they remove the whole thyroid gland because there's multiple nodules in there. Or it's such a small gland, it's easier for them. So you can have people with like half their thyroid taken out and the other half not. And it is possible that patients have suffered such severe autoimmune symptoms that the doctor has convinced them it would be better just to remove it and just take thyroid replacement rather than deal with such a faulty organ that they don't really understand that can be, in a sense, treated. And then this is where I think there are people who are getting their thyroids removed without getting kind of like all the explanation of maybe other pathways. Again, if you have a completely bum thyroid organ and it's all full of nodules, yeah, like I get it. Like there may be a reason to remove it, but I think there's lots of reasons to question whether taking that thyroid out is a good idea, because nothing works as well as a functioning organ gland. You can't replace really naturally, in a sense, any hormone the way the body would have made it. It's always going to be less better. That's not even the right thing to say, but it's sorry for my grammar, but yeah, it's not going to work really as efficiently as your own thyroid. So you want to preserve, this is true of all organs, right? We think of your uterus and your ovaries, like preserve them if they work, because nothing's going to work as good as your own body.
Right. And we think too about how, again, it's so important for the thyroid to function properly, but that it takes the whole body to be functioning properly for our glands to be working properly. Like hormones, our whole goal of hormones is to keep our body in balance. But I think about even like, the HPA axis, or the HPT axis, or how if there is a high level of stress. So we talked about gut health and how gut health is important so that our body isn't increasingly becoming more and more inflamed and it becomes an autoimmune issue. But even just stress in of itself, our body prioritizes survival. So, Teresa, in terms of those patients, I know we should not like profile our clients or patients just based on lifestyle and what they look like. But if you had to say, maybe break into percentage or whatever makes the most sense for you to answer this question, who are the people that suffer the most from thyroid disorders, whether it's Hashimoto's or otherwise? Think about the woman who's super stressed and her body's prioritizing survival. Does she also commonly have thyroid issues, or does it partner along with other things that are often just, like a gut health issue or a dietary lifestyle issue?
Yeah, it's somewhat all over the board, but there's always kind of a stereotypical type of patient. Yes. And I think if you had to with Hashimoto's, it would be, I would say, somewhat of a heightened emotional person. Meaning that like when they experience life trauma, like it's a big deal. Like, it's just like they wear their heart on their sleeve, and put it that way. Like they feel and they let their body go into that experience. And I think because of that personality trait, which is beautiful, I think the body responds versus somebody else who kind of like is able to, for whatever reason, let it roll off their back.
Right.
So that may be true, Jamie. And I know that they've linked people with emotional trauma, physical trauma to having triggers of autoimmunity. You can almost you could go into any autoimmune condition after a severe trauma.
Right.
Like you said, it's a trigger. It's also a trigger to worsening a leaky gut as well, which may be a part of that process. Other than that, I mean, like if we think of the common symptoms of thyroid, hypothyroidism, this is low thyroid, right? And in a minute, maybe we'll go through kind of the different levels that, we need to look at when we're trying to determine this. But common symptoms of Hashimoto's, and these symptoms could be present even without having abnormal labs in a sense. So just know that, because people who have Hashimoto's have the antibodies well before their labs in terms of the hormone are off. So you can be having symptoms and be kind of borderline, or if you're someone who's been in the doctor and you're like, gosh, I know something's wrong. They just keep telling me my hormones are all normal, right? So common. So if you're experiencing kind of this really consistent fatigue, honestly, and I heard Dr. Isabella Wentz, she's like called a thyroid pharmacist. Great resource, by the way, for learning about Hashimoto's, Graves' disease, autoimmune thyroid. Isabella Wentz, Dr. Isabella Wentz, the thyroid pharmacist. But she was saying that, she was made fun of, even in college, by her family and siblings as being a couch potato
Mm,
because she slept all the time. She couldn't get enough sleep. And then she kind of, she was looked at as almost lazy.
mm,
And it instantly took me back to my own sister who has Hashimoto's. And we did the same thing to her.
mm,
We called her lazy. And so maybe you've been told you're lazy or that you're just not motivated enough or you sleep all the time. Um, One of the other things that is very common is hair loss and dry hair. So dry hair and hair falling out. So if your hair
mhm,
is falling out and you have no other way to explain that and you're really tired, you should have your thyroid checked. It can cause dry skin because it's lowering, again, this metabolic energy. So it's causing dry skin. And it can cause weight gain because in lowering metabolism, you can gain weight for no reason.
mhm,
It also affects our brain in a way that can make people feel depressed,
mhm,
or even like the word is dysthymic. Like I'm not super depressed, but I sure don't just like have any joy for life.
mhm.
So that would be a common one. Joint aches and pains, just because, again, you've got inflammation from all that leaky gut. So you can have joint aches and pains. And here's a weird one, but kind of consistent, some sort of an eye thing where either your eyes feel puffy or you have like dry skin patches around your eyelids,
Huh.
or you're losing the outer third of your eyebrow. So if you're like losing what seems to be the outer third of your eyebrow, that could be a thyroid condition.
What? No
Yeah.
way. Whoa, no way. And Teresa, even with the women you're working with who struggle with infertility, right? Talk about how Hashimoto's affects fertility.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, probably on multiple levels, but we just know that without a normal thyroid, you don't have, in a sense, normal ovulation. You don't have normal menstrual cycles. We know people with low thyroid have irregular cycles sometimes, but they also have really heavy, abnormally heavy periods. It could cause disruption of ovulation, so your periods are all over the place. And it probably, from a standpoint of metabolic health, affects egg quality and probably a lot of other things. But yes, fertility. And so and this is an area where I just want to, really tell people that if you're pregnant or wanting to be pregnant and your doctor's telling you that your thyroid's a little off, that is something where we as healthcare professionals want to be much more aggressive in a sense to optimizing your thyroid in that situation, and may even want to use medication when you weren't expecting that because it's so important to fertility.
Yeah, right.
And, we know when people are having fertility struggles, it's also the most important thing to them. And so I want you to understand that there may be a need for medication just for this particular reason around fertility and pregnancy, when maybe we wouldn't have used it outside of that situation
Hmm.
yet. But
Hmm.
it's more urgent in a sense to make sure, and especially when you are pregnant, because your pregnancy, the health of it relies upon a normal functioning and optimal thyroid.
Mm. Don't you think that the thyroid just doesn't get enough attention? It hasn't seen its maybe in terms of the maybe Instagram world. The gut gets attention. I feel like it got a lot more attention. Our metabolism, like our insulin sensitivity, those sorts of things get a lot of attention. Our cortisol, our stress. It doesn't feel like there's been like a thyroid boom. You know what I mean when I say that? Or
Yeah,
do you
there
feel like
might
you
have
have seen
been. I feel like there
it? Okay.
had been, honestly,
Okay.
like about it's. I mean, maybe it just because I've been around a little longer than you, Jamie, but no.
Yeah.
But I feel like around 10 to 15 years ago, there was
Oh, there was.
this documentary series that came out called The Root Cause. And then Dr. Isabella Wentz came out with her book. And then, yeah, I do think there was a big phase of it. I think now we've just kind of moved on to gut. Gut just
Yeah,
kind of took over,
totally.
but so related to all of it because so much of what we're talking about is really autoimmune conditions and how much
Mhm.
they've increased. And again, if it all started with Hashimoto's,
Yeah.
that crazy. Yeah.
Crazy. So, in terms of our root causes and being healthy, Teresa, I want to make sure I take time now to give a shout out to our podcast partners, We Heart Nutrition. One of, well, a couple supplements that are important and nutrients, minerals we need for our thyroid is selenium and iodine. And so even just having a really good multivitamin is so important. So, so important. So We Heart Nutrition is a great supplement company. We encourage you to check out their supplements. For 20% off, type in Hormone Genius, weheartnutrition.com. And again, magnesium glycinate, we always sing its praises all the time. Wholesome balance, we love, but just even their multivitamin, their omega is so good. So if you're needing a good quality supplement, check out We Heart Nutrition, Hormone Genius as the
Just
code for
genius.
20% off.
Just genius. It's
It's just
actually just
genius,
genius. Yeah.
Golly.
Yeah. 20% off, just
Just
genius.
genius, guys.
This is
Just
a
genius.
perfect segue, Jamie, because now we can talk about the nutrients that so are important to thyroid. And like you said, a lot of them can be in a really high quality multivitamin and a prenatal vitamin. So I often tell people you don't necessarily need to be trying to get pregnant to have a prenatal vitamin on board in your life, because it's meant to kind of have all these things that would protect two people, a mom and a baby, right? So, iodine we know is an essential nutrient, and I get it. You guys out there you're my well-educated patients. You're like, Teresa, what is up with the iodine? Am I supposed to get more iodine, or am I supposed to not get more iodine? And frankly, I'm a little confused by it too. However, this is what we know. Iodine in excess for people who already have thyroid antibodies can heighten the inflammation in their thyroid. So if you're getting excessive amounts of iodine, it can heighten an autoimmune condition if it already is present. And that's the problem. But everybody absolutely needs iodine. It's like if you don't have iodine in your body, you cannot make thyroid hormone. If you don't have flour, you can't make bread. If you don't have iodine, you don't make thyroid. So it's an essential nutrient to the thyroid. So my advice to people is to get the recommended daily allowance at least, which is 150 micrograms. And on some of my patients who I believe need more, I have them do one sea kelp capsule, which is about 300 micrograms, or I'll have them do a thyroid support supplement, which a lot of times these are multivitamins with kind of all the thyroid nutrients that are necessary for the thyroid. So that's the skinny on iodine. I personally think people should be thinking about if they're getting enough iodine and do that recommended daily allowance. But I am not someone who believes people should go into high doses of iodine without some sort of guidance from a strong medical professional.
Yep, yep. Now talk about because we always talk about selenium. I know one of our very first episodes, season one, you talked about selenium, and 5 Brazil nuts a day is the daily recommended amount. It has the daily recommended amount of selenium. And even to this day, people are like, I still eat my 5 Brazil nuts a day just from that episode, you know?
Yeah.
So talk about the importance of selenium to our thyroid.
Yeah, it's so important. It's so important. And I think it's such a good nutrient and one that I've used a lot in thyroid and have seen quite a bit of benefit from using it as a supplement. But selenium's involved in like the process of what we call deiodinase. And that just means like our body has to convert our T4 into T3. And selenium is one of the main nutrients that does that. And so when you hear about people talk about T3 and how I might not convert that very well, you might have a selenium deficiency. And you're right, Jamie, Brazil nuts have the most amount of selenium out of all the nuts. And so if you can get a really good organic Brazil nut, because I know then people talk about, well, some Brazil nuts are bad and they have mold and stuff, but if you can get a really high quality one, yes, you can get all the selenium you need from Brazil nuts. Some people don't like Brazil nuts. I don't think I like Brazil nuts that much, either. Give me a cashew all day, but Brazil nuts,
Yeah.
So if you just want to take a supplement, there again, you can get this a variety of ways. You can just get selenium in 100 or 200 micrograms. That's your range, 100 to 200 micrograms. And they can sometimes be paired with other nutrients, like I said, even just zinc. Like one I use a lot is from Mercola, and it's just selenium and zinc, which is also incredibly important for the thyroid too. We talk about zinc a lot. You don't want too much. You just want enough. And this is true of all nutrients. You just need enough, not too much. So selenium, zinc, B12, incredibly important. All the B vitamins, folate, B6, all of the B vitamins are important. Again, in a good quality multivitamin, you would probably get all of those, but Some people really struggle with B12 levels beyond that. And so they might want to add extra B12. And you can have your level tested. Honestly, you can have your level tested on all of these. You can have an iodine level, you can have a selenium level, you can have a zinc level. Not saying everybody has to do that, but you can get your blood tested and you can pay cash rates for that. Or a lot of times insurance does cover, vitamin testing. At least I have seen that it does. So B12, zinc, selenium, a huge one, Jamie, for women in particular, and is associated. This deficiency is really associated with having low thyroid is low ferritin or low iron stores. So if you are a woman, you've been told you have low iron, again, that can go with having a poor functioning thyroid. And these are the types of nutrients that, when restored, can put a thyroid issue into remission. I have had people where they were on the edge and we got all their nutrients better and they adjusted their diet and cleaned that up and, maybe got gluten out of their diet if that was something that they wanted to do. And they put themselves into a normal thyroid state with those nutrients. So you need your iron levels good. And lastly, omega-3s, I just think are really important because they're always anti-inflammatory and they do help with the thyroid and autoimmune conditions and a lot of other things. So those are your basic ones. Hope I'm not forgetting a major one.
Yeah. Yeah. So important. And you mentioned like eating right, lifestyle. A note that I had to ask you about, Teresa, was a couple of my friends have thyroid disorders, and one in particular really struggles with Hashimoto's. And she has stopped eating dairy and gluten, and it was so hard for her. And I think she's on year 2 or even maybe year 3 of this. It's just become a part of her life. She doesn't eat gluten and she does not eat dairy, and her levels did improve, but not as much as one might think. She still really struggles. It's just very interesting what causes that inflammation and how sometimes we go straight to oats, dairy, and gluten. And for many women, it probably is. It probably is. It's really kind of getting to the source of what's causing inflammation in the body. Is it the dairy and the gluten? Is there a food sensitivity? And that can also be checked for. Or do you have another food sensitivity that's causing inflammation? I have a friend and she would get flares constantly, like her skin would just get like eczema. And she could not figure out what was the cause of these skin flares. And she found out that she has a food sensitivity to avocado. And because avocado is so healthy, she would eat an avocado every day. But her body didn't want that right then. She needed to heal her gut before she reintroduced avocado. It caused inflammation. And so sometimes I wonder, for people who have these autoimmune conditions, we go straight to dairy and gluten, which I think it's wise to start there, but to even consider what are other foods we eat maybe all the time that's aggravating our system. So talk about, Teresa, like how common is it for the women that you work with, and even men, who have Hashimoto's, who discontinue eating dairy and gluten, and who do find help or relief with their thyroid levels?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And just so you know, 1 in 5, I believe, I might be wrong in that statistic, but it's definitely increased. Celiac is more common with Hashimoto's. So it definitely should be thought to screen someone with Hashimoto's for celiac and vice versa. If you have, again, any other autoimmune condition, you have vitiligo, which is where your skin turns white in patches. That also is a high risk for thyroid issues, and you should be screened for Hashimoto's as well. So the gluten thing. So yeah, I mean, I have found it's not across the board that people feel better when they eliminate gluten. Sometimes it has to do with how well they eliminated it. Sometimes it has to do with how long they eliminated it. And sometimes I do wonder if they would have stuck with it a little longer, they would have seen benefit. So I would say at least half of patients, it's a miracle. I mean, they feel tremendously better. Their gut is better. They feel less inflamed. Their energy levels are better. But is a second half where they're just not sure it's really making a difference. And so they're questioning whether to continue it, or they don't want to continue it at all because they didn't feel better. And that's rough. But we do know that gluten is one of the primary reasons that intestinal permeability can happen. So it's kind of a no-brainer that with any autoimmune condition, you would consider eliminating it. And there are ways to test for gluten allergy, which is celiac, and gluten sensitivity. And as you expressed, Jamie, you can do other food sensitivities too. I use a company called Alates, and I do food sensitivity profiles. They're not perfect, and I'm not going to say they're perfect, but they do give a roadmap for people to at least have a starting point to know what to eliminate if they want to kind of have an elimination kind of pathway. So I do think they can be helpful.
What about stool tests?
Yes. And so irritable bowel, if you have irritable bowel syndrome, slow gut, constipation, that was another symptom that I didn't mention in this symptom complex, but constipation would be very common. It's very common with thyroid issues. And yes, gut infections and gut issues are just incredibly common with thyroid. So I think this is where a good functional medicine person to do maybe a stool test to look for H. pylori, which would be very common, and other parasitic infections, other gut imbalances like SIBO, which is much more common in hypothyroid as well. But sometimes your mainstream traditional doctors aren't as good at testing for those things. SIBO is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. I find it in a lot of patients. It causes excessive bloating, can cause diarrhea or constipation, but bloating is kind of the hallmark of it. So gut infections, gut issues, very, very common. So you do need sometimes someone to work with you on those things because it's not across the board all one prescription. It's not all gluten-free for everybody. It's not all paleo for everybody. It's definitely sometimes unique, and I think you need hormone coaches sometimes to help you, right? Jamie,
Totally.
you're about to launch your next cohort of Fiat Institute hormone coaches, and I know you're looking for great, smart, passionate women to join this next cohort. So please contact Jamie at contact@fiatinstitute.com. And please, if you're out there and you've been thinking about this, you've listened to Jamie and you've been like, I want to help women, you have a passion for this, please reach out. She has an incredible hormone program through the Fiat Institute that will certify you to be a legit hormone coach. So,
Thanks, Teresa.
yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. And what's so incredible as well is just throughout the years, Teresa, of doing this work, I've been able to partner with companies that do check for stool. Like Tiny Health is a GI testing organization that I really love. They're the first company that has ever taken into account the stool of newborn babies. So this doctor had a baby and her baby just had all these issues, and so she wanted to check the stool of her baby. And there's not parameters. There was no benchmarks, nothing. That just wasn't a thing. And so she produced it. She started this whole movement, and then from there became very passionate about gut health for all ages. But anyway, that's a side note because we're talking about gut health. But even looking at minerals like HTMA and staying connected to organizations that are just awesome. So, yes, for those of you who are interested in making a career out of hormone coaching, it's what you learn, but it's also who we do this with. It's like our sisterhood, it's the community, it's a movement. And so, Teresa, thanks for giving us a shout out because our cohort January 2026 will begin soon, but I'm taking applications and seats are limited. So we want to make sure we get the word out.
Yeah, 100%. Jamie, we're starting to wrap up and I don't want to miss this because I have limited time because I gotta go to work here pretty soon,
Yeah.
but I want to get in the testing, the thyroid blood testing.
Yeah.
So I want to explain if you're in a regular doctor's office and you've listened to this podcast and you're like, okay, I'm going to advocate for myself. I have these symptoms. I'm worried I have a thyroid issue. And you don't want that Hashimoto's piece to be missed because again, traditional doctors don't test for the thyroid antibodies. It's very frustrating and especially frustrating if you have the symptoms. They should test for it. So you want to ask for the thyroid stimulating hormone. That is the basic test. TSH. TSH. You want to ask for a free T4, which is your T4 hormone, which all has to be converted to T3 in order to be the active hormone in your body. But T4, very important. You want a free T3 or a total T3 or both. But T3, it is the active hormone. It's the one that's giving you energy. It's the one that's doing all the things. It has to be the master energy hormone of the entire body. Very important to get your T3. And then the thyroid antibodies. And there's two in particular for Hashimoto's. They're the TPO, thyroid peroxidase antibodies. And then there's the TG antibodies. So it's thyroglobulin antibodies. So TG and TPO for the antibodies. If you have severe autoimmune symptoms, like you've got the eye thing and maybe your eyes are kind of bulging even or really doing something weird and your heart feels like it's pounding a lot or you're losing weight, you should also be tested for Graves' disease, which is another autoimmune condition, much more rare. But that has an antibody called the TSI antibody or thyroid stimulating immunoglobulin. So TSI for Graves. And that's much more rare. But again, if you are losing weight, super anxious, heart racing, hot, hair falling out too, but eyes are all kind of messed up, please ask for about Graves. But we're focused more on Hashimoto's. It's much, much more common and what causes 90 to 97% of all thyroid issues. So very, very important. Those are the main blood tests. Now, some people ask about reverse T3. And I do test reverse T3, but I would say people, I don't know, I don't think it's necessary to have that done for most people. Reverse T3 is kind of like the mirror image of T3, but it's inactive. It doesn't really do anything in the body. But when you're super stressed, and especially like a big time stress, like a big illness or a big trauma, that reverse T3 can increase because the body thinks it needs to divert its energy to the trauma. And if you increase your reverse T3 too much, it's like putting the brakes on T3, the actual active hormone, and you can be almost like super tired and have all the symptoms because of a high reverse T3. It's just not very common. And so I don't test it in all of my thyroid patients. And another thing that will really affect reverse T3 is undernutrition. You have an eating disorder, you're a high-end athlete, you are not nutrient calorie sufficient, you are decreasing your T3 and increasing your RT3 or reverse T3.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's really important. Really, really important. Perhaps we could even include that in the show notes, Teresa, so that then as gals are listening, they can bring that to their doctor, and the doctor should know. I mean, what is an easy way to explain to a doctor? Do I just want a full thyroid panel? Are they going to do that for women if they explain it that way, or should they come with the list?
I would come with a list. Okay. Saying full thyroid panel to a doctor may just mean T3 and or it may just mean TSH and T4. Okay. So you want to write them out because unless you say thyroid antibodies, I want the thyroid antibodies, they may not understand to even run them. So I would bring the list, and yes, we'll put those in the show notes. So Jamie, I want to summarize like just the things that you can do. Number one, don't panic. Like Hashimoto's is very common, guys, very common. Up to 20 million people in the United States have it. But not getting diagnosed early is a problem, and not advocating for yourself is a problem. The things that you want to focus on from a lifestyle perspective is you want to get your gut health straight, because that is the main issue in terms of what's causing the autoimmunity. So you want to get ultra processed foods out. You want to eat whole foods. You want to get rid of the toxins that are in foods. And you want to consider getting rid of gluten if you have Hashimoto's. And beyond that, there are other things that can be eliminated for people to feel better as well, but we'll stick with gluten being the primary one. Mm-hmm. You want to get your stress under control, because if you have Hashimoto's, what's going to happen is every time you don't handle stress well, you can put yourself into a flare. Mm. And in a flare, you basically are tired and your symptoms are coming fully back. So you want to keep your stress under control. You want to sleep. You want to make sure all that is in order from a lifestyle perspective. And lastly, you want to get the nutrients right. So generally, I would say these people are people that are probably going to need to supplement with certain nutrients, B12, selenium, zinc, iron, sometimes some adrenal adaptogens like ashwagandha. And we've talked about adrenal health because, again, stress is such a big time factor in thyroid. So getting the adrenal to work well, it takes all those lifestyle things, but sometimes some adaptogens like ashwagandha, there's plenty more. And in the, some of the nutrient supplements, the multivitamins that are called thyroid support, like Pure Encapsulations has one, Now brand has one. they have adaptogens in them as well to support the thyroid. So that's kind of nice that they're blended in there.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Teresa. I learned so much as usual, and I'm sure our listeners learned a ton too. Stay tuned to our upcoming season 6 episodes. We're so thankful for all of our listeners. Be sure to leave a review. Be sure that you're following our podcast, and be sure to share our podcast with a friend. All right. Thanks, Teresa. Thanks for listening to the Hormone Genius podcast. Please remember to share our podcast with your friends and family, and also follow us on social media. If you were not aware, we have a YouTube channel, so if you could like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay in the loop with all of our latest episodes, we would appreciate that. Thank you so much for your support. We are excited to journey alongside you as you discover the beauty and the genius of your hormones.